bill. We, for our part, on these benches, shall do our best to improve it.
My Lords, I thank those that have engaged in today's lively debate on the bill. I have listened carefully and with much interest to the excellent points being raised across your Lordship's House. I will attempt to respond to some, but not half as many questions and concerns as I would like to because of the time, but we also, of course, have the committee stage at which we can explore many of these issues in greater detail. In the meantime, I'll follow up where I can, as soon as I can, some of the issues that I can't mention now. I thank the Earl of Effingham for his introduction. Much of it is covered by what Lord Moylan has just said. I would say one or two things to him in passing, one of which is the notion that bus fares increased by 50% from £2 to £3. It is, of course, a calculation that bus fares of £2 increased to £3. But in fact, of course, many passengers don't travel on individual tickets, and as the industry trade body said itself, for the 26% of passengers who travel on individual tickets, many fares for shorter journeys remain below £3. The cost of franchising in Manchester is not £1 billion. It actually cost, on a once-off basis, £135 million. Much of that paid for by Greater Manchester itself, and in fact one of the reasons it cost so much money is because it took 6 years, because the process was so convoluted, and that is a clear aim of this bill, which is to make franchising easier to do. And lastly, just as a point of issue, it's not only electric buses that get recalled by manufacturers. As a bus operator myself, I can tell you of many circumstances in which buses have rightly been recalled for safety reasons, and I think it's inevitable that zero-emission buses will take over in future, and this bill seeks to make sure that the industry recognises that. But he is right in referring to a one-team ethos. I'm not entirely sure that sentiment was reflected in what the noble Lord Moylan just said, but we'll do our best to get a good bill out of this, I'm sure, and I welcome that sentiment. I'll turn to Baroness Pidgeon and thank her for her really helpful remarks. The devolution of funding and the statutory guidance given by the Secretary of State, which is section 154A, we will debate that in committee. It's not the intention to apparently devolve funding and then put on such rules that in fact it's not really devolved. And indeed, the intention of the bill is to allow a much greater level of freedom for local transport authorities than they have had, and it's also the intention of the government in due course to streamline the funding streams above that, and I recognise that point completely. I'm as confused, as frankly, as some noble lords are about how many streams there are, and the noble Baroness mentioned some of them, and it would be better. But actually the result of this bill is to make, at the point at which the money is distributed, it makes it much easier to do, and that must be the right thing. I recognise the points about young people's fares. Of course, that there are already local transport authorities that give concessions to young people, and certainly nothing in this bill will prevent that. But I think the wider point, which we'll come to again and again with this bill, is that this is designed to give local transport authorities more freedom, and a number of noble lords have referred to that this afternoon and this evening, and it is actually the right thing to do, because buses are a local service. They're not a national service. I'll come back to the noble Lord Moylan's specific remarks at the end, but the clear intention of this bill is to allow local transport authorities to decide what methodology of providing a service is best for them, and then to do it. I was much heartened by hearing from the noble Lord Burns, as a former permanent Secretary of the Treasury, that he welcomed multi-year funding, and I will reflect with my colleagues in government how what his experience is of that. and of course we have to wait for the spring financial statements to know what this government is able to do in the straitened financial circumstances in which it finds itself. He and others have referred to open data, and I can certainly commit to the fact that open data is the intention of this bill and of the government. And the intention of open data, of course, reflecting Lord Moylan's recent point, is that it should be free. And that is the right thing to do. If you want public transport usage to increase, then the data should be available. And I've got a rather good story to tell the House about open data, which is that when Transport for London, we searched for the person who developed the best open data app for the Underground, and I said I'd like to see that person. It turned out they worked for a bank in Melbourne, and it wasn't immediately possible for them to turn up in my office. But it is a really important point. Lord Whitty and others referred to integrated ticketing, as did the Noble Lord Hampton, and I will write to them about that. It is obviously the intention of having integrated ticketing. It's one of the attractions of franchising that it enables that to happen. And one of the weaknesses of commercial bus provision outside London, frankly, is the degree to which individual operators would rather offer that technology but only on their own buses, whereas actually what the public and the passengers want is for it to be available on every bus. And I know that my noble colleague here from Leeds and West Yorkshire has some experience of that, and it's obviously desirable for passengers, particularly in urban areas, to be able to use any bus and for the ticketing system to be consistent. A number of noble lords have referred to training, and of course there is already mandatory training for bus drivers. The intention of this bill is to specify further mandatory training, but deliver it within that regime, and I think that that's absolutely right. A number of noble lords have also referred to the roads on which buses operate, and it is of course quite right that the reliability and indeed the economics of bus operation are vastly altered by the existence of congestion and the ability of buses to get through traffic, whether it's through bus lanes or other things. One of the most notable things about the Manchester franchising is that the consequence, almost immediately, of putting some of the bus service into the control of the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and also then to be reflected in the local transport authority, was that a vastly increased focus then immediately was available on actually, for example, getting rid of temporary traffic lights, of straightening out traffic management. And I think it's an area that there have been references this afternoon, this evening, to the experience of what help can be given to local transport authorities who wish to engage in franchising. And I think one of the, alongside it, and the Bus Centre of Excellence has been mentioned, it doesn't need full-time employees, it needs advice to be available when advice is needed. But one of the features of that is also to give some advice on traffic management, so that buses can take their appropriate place in transporting passengers in local areas. It's always a delight to hear from the noble Lord McLaughlin. He's made some excellent decisions in his time, including appointing me as the chair of Network Rail, though I have to tell him my wife was not similarly impressed by that appointment. And many of the points he raises are obviously germane, and in particular the very sharp decline in passenger numbers in the north of England. And he said one size doesn't fit all, and he's absolutely right. I think that's much more to the point than the noble Lord McLaughlin. What this bill does is enable local transport authorities in cities, in towns and in rural areas to choose what is the best way of going forward. It's not necessarily franchising. Even if it is franchising, it's not necessarily on whole routes. Some of it is about franchising in particular areas where a franchise mechanism might produce better public services. And the government doesn't want to dictate whether or not you should have a franchise. The government wants local transport authorities to use the best mechanisms they can. It was a delight to hear from the noble Baroness Bennett, and it's even better to hear that the noble Baroness Jones is recovering, and I look forward to seeing her in her place. The noble Baroness raised a number of questions which I think will have to be answered either in committee stage or in correspondence. She referred particularly to recovering lost routes, and of course one of the real sadnesses of the last several years is that some of the bus funding has actually been available to start new bus routes when the old ones ceased because they weren't able to be funded through that funding arrangement. And it's even better if routes are not stopped and then started again, because in the course of that you lose quite a lot of patronage. She mentioned the noble Baroness mentioned South Yorkshire in particular, and I can tell her that the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Combined Authority has completed a franchising assessment, and the consultation on their scheme closes on the 15th of January. I listened very carefully indeed to the noble Baroness Harris of Richmond, and I had an exchange with her previously about the circumstances in North Yorkshire that she raised. The concerns she raised are known to the government. I am also aware there's a petition tabled to Parliament by the member for that area in the other place, and my colleagues in the Department for Education will respond to that shortly. I also note out of interest that North Yorkshire is a Conservative council. The noble Lord Snape referred to matters including the costs of zero-emission buses. One of the reasons for this bill proposing both an effective ban on non-zero emission vehicles, but the date of 2030, is that he will know, as an experienced bus person, that actually the costs of zero emissions and hybrid vehicles have gone down, and actually the intention of this is to support the sales, which government has also supported very strongly through this, and the previous governments have supported through funding, in order to bring down the costs of those vehicles such that they are available and they're economic to run when that time comes. There are a lot of points raised by the noble Baroness Pinnock about bus services, and many of them are germane, and we shall discuss them, I have absolutely no doubt, in the committee stage. She asked whether I agreed that as local transport authorities have more, which will get more responsibility, that should more councillors be involved. I'm not sure that's my job to decide that, but what I would say, and it's been mentioned before, is that certainly help might be needed in some of these arrangements, and I do know, and I think it's quite well known, that actually the quality of passenger transport in local transport authorities does depend on having expertise, and in that sense, and in that matter, I agree also with the noble Lord Moylan. But actually that is one of the purposes of this bill, which is to set out the choices, and the department will be available in order to, the department is putting money aside and resource aside in order to help people make the right choices and then institute them successfully. The noble Lord Hampton raised several issues about safety, and I will consider the points which he and others have raised about whether data should be collected about safety. I'll certainly write to him, and I have no doubt that we will raise that those matters will be raised in committee. I don't drive passenger service vehicles in service very often now, but my technique in keeping time was always secondary to road safety, and my belief is that very widely in the bus industry that's still true, if only because financially bus operators and for that matter local transport authorities that choose to operate buses will always be subject to the costs of insurance. But we'll have a further look at driver welfare, and no doubt we will discuss it. He also raised data sharing, which I've already referred to. It was extraordinarily kind of the noble Lord Holmes to refer to London 2012. It now seems quite a long time ago. I don't claim that It is a long time ago, Lord Moylan, I completely agree. But the only thing I wanted to say is that I don't claim particular credit myself. If you lead a team, you should give the credit to the team that you lead and not take it all yourself. His much more important points are about inclusion and accessibility, and I absolutely recognise the points he's making about the accessibility of the bus service to people with disabilities. I do note his contention that Section 22 doesn't go far enough. What I do promise to do, but I'm sure that we'll discuss it in committee, is to go and look at the degree and extent to which Section 22 can answer his points. He must be able to see that actually the intention of Section 22 is to make an improvement in bus stopping areas, and also to for the Secretary of State to give some guidance which ought to be mandatorily taken into regard by local transport authorities and indeed local highway authorities. The Noble Lord Berkeley raised points about community control and who's in control, and as I said, the point of this matter is to return control to local transport authorities. And he also raised the question, and I think he largely answered it himself, about what happens if local transport authorities don't do their job. And the answer is that one would hope that the citizens of the local transport authority would vote them out for not doing their job. That is the remedy. I don't think the Secretary of State coming down on local transport authorities like a ton of bricks is a very satisfactory alternative to that. And we want to return control to the people who should rightly have it. I would say to him, incidentally, that there have been bus routes down the embankment since the trains went. I used to travel on Route 109, but it doesn't do that anymore. The Noble Baroness Brinton also raised some really important points in this bill. She raised Clause 9 about approved persons, and we will discuss in committee, but the intention is not to deregulate approved persons. The point is to widen the range of approved persons, but they should, I completely agree with her, have some qualifications. It can't be the case that you can be unqualified and make a judgment about whether a franchising scheme is right or not. She asked on Clause 11 whether that complied with the procurement regulations, and I am advised that I'm able to tell her completely that it does. She welcomed Clause 19 and also referred to assistance data, and we will take that away and see what can be done. I think bringing data on bus service usage into the 21st century is quite important, and I'm sympathetic to the idea that collecting data, as long as it isn't a burden to bus operators or indeed local transport authorities, is the right thing to do, so that we know what's really going on. I note very much and very clearly her comments about clauses 24 and 25 about diversity training not being the same as the rights for disabled people, and also what we did with her great assistance in the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill, referring to the Equality Act, and I'll go away and reflect on that. And then lastly, I'll come to the Noble Lord Moylan, who has some extraordinary views about socialist paradises and returning to the era of the Attlee government. I find it particularly extraordinary because I know that the Noble Lord has such a strong view about the autonomy of local authorities, and I think what this bill is intended to do is to return bus services to the autonomy of local authorities, and for the Secretary of State not to intervene so much in the provision of services. There is also, I have to tell him, a huge disparity in the provision of bus services currently across Britain. And not only, as he knows, was I responsible for the bus service in London, but for a measurable length of time I was also responsible for the bus services in what was laughingly called South East England, but apparently included Norfolk, Northampton, Leicester and Southampton. And even amongst one bus group 20 years ago, there was an extraordinary variation in the provision of services and the extent particularly to which bus operators sought to maximise the network and maximise the return on it, or cut off individual journeys, to the extent to which some towns and cities in Britain find themselves short or even without bus services after 7 o'clock in the evening and on Sundays. And I can tell noble lords that I think I know roughly how to run a bus network, and one of the things that you would do, which is the feature of the best bus services run by the private companies in outside London, and I can mention some places, but I won't, is that they do seek to service the network. They do seek to take people both to school and to hospital and to work and to leisure and take them home. It's those places where those services have drifted away where actually something else needs to be done. And that's also true of rural services. He alleged, quite wrongly, that this bill doesn't deal with demand-responsive transport. It very much does. It's one of the remedies open to local transport authorities, as it should be. It's not a particularly cheap methodology, but it is there to be used. And in fact, there's some startlingly good examples of doing it. And of course, he refers to it as though this is an urban feature, but his own government instituted an experimental regime in Cornwall, which is, as the noble Lord Berkeley knows, has produced rather a good bus service in Cornwall by actually having features of the Cornwall Council's activities, which amount to much of franchising, like as in the way that this bill will allow to happen. I've come to my allotted time. I think that there's a limit to what I can answer here. As I set out today, the bill's primarily about empowering local leaders wherever they are, and it's a privilege to bring this forward to your Lordship's House for the second reading. I thank all Lords who have participated in today's debate. I welcome the support of those who've spoken in favour of the bill's measures, and I look forward to the continuing debate of the bill during the Grand Committee. I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. As many are of that opinion should say content. The contrary not contents. The contents have it.
Thank you.
My Lords, I beg to move the other motion standing in my name on the ordered paper.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many areas of that opinion will say content. The contrary not contents. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn.
That the House do now adjourn.